Hello and welcome. I'm Paul Kilmer, the National Building Museum's Director of Public Programs. Thank you for joining us for this next program in our timely and important new series, Climate ABC. The National Building Museum's mission is to educate and engage people about the built environment and its impact on our lives and communities. As a primary driver of global warming, carbon emissions impact everything from the future of coastal cities to the record flooding that threatens communities across the country and around the world. The built environment is responsible for nearly 40% of carbon emissions worldwide, and the museum is committed to offering programs that educate and empower innovative and positive action on this topic. For the last 4 decades, we've presented celebrated exhibitions and programs that have touched on everything from design and construction to social justice and equity issues. And we've been at the forefront of sustainability and resilience topics, beginning with our 2003 exhibition, Big and Green Towards Sustainable Architecture in the 21st Century, and continuing with our Smart Growth and For the Greener Good series. This program is no exception. Climate ABC, which stands for Action Building Community, focuses on 3 essential aspects to addressing climate change. Actions by individuals, businesses, nonprofits, policymakers, and civic entities. Examples of building, both physical structures and landscapes, as well as coalitions of stakeholders, and communities at every scale that are working to reduce carbon emissions. These dynamic programs are designed both to educate everyone about climate action and to drive substantive solutions in the building industries to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. That we have shifted our language and focus about environmental topics from green to climate change since our 2003 exhibition shows just how urgent and critical things have become. But as we're going to hear shortly, there are ways forward to reduce our carbon emissions impact, especially when there is cooperation and collaboration between government, industry, community, and consumer stakeholders. Everyone has a role to play. I want to thank and recognize Wholesome as the lead sponsor of Climate ABC, and to Joseph Massip, VP for Strategy and Commercial Excellence, for his role in providing us with the valuable support we needed to undertake this important work. While Joseph couldn't be live with us today, he sends us this tape message. Let's hear that now.
The built environment has an essential role to play in our transition to a fully sustainable planet. At the Wholesome family of companies, we're proud to support the National Building Museum's Climate ABC series. Innovation, collaboration, looking at the whole picture, all these are key elements to bring real change, and this series touches on each one of them. Taking meaningful steps to minimize our environmental impact is everyone's responsibility. At Wholesome, we take this seriously and are committed to building a net zero future. We're on our way with our low carbon cements and concretes, our recycled aggregates and asphalt offerings, and our roofing solutions that significantly increase the energy efficiency of any building. But we're just getting started. The opportunities to rethink and transform the built environment are substantial. So let's take up the challenge. Let's do it together, and let's do it right now. On behalf of Wholesome, I want to thank the National Building Museum for the opportunity, and Eileen for her leadership.
Thank you, Joseph, and to Wholesome as well for your generous support of Climate ABC. I also want to thank our additional sponsors, EYP, the American Institutes of Architects, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and Studios Architecture, as well as C40 Cities, our lead partner. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our moderator. Susan Piedmont-Palladino is an architect and director of Virginia Tech's Washington Alexandria Architecture Center, go Hokies. She is also a consulting curator with the National Building Museum and has notably curated Green Community in 2008 and our current exhibition, Justice is Beauty, the work of Mass Design Group. Please welcome Susan Piedmont-Palladino.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here for another program. So welcome to the March edition of Climate ABC. If you have been with us since the beginning of the series in November, then you know that the connections among action, building, and community, and I want to remind everyone, building is a verb and a noun. The connections are a web of regulations, incentives, envelope-pushing designs, innovative construction practices, and increasingly important communications about successes and best practices. As Paul emphasized, there's really no time to waste. We saw just in this last week a lot of data coming in from Antarctica that we should all be concerned about in terms of the impact on our environment. And in fact, last year's innovations quickly become this year's standard practices. So this evening, we're going to hear from 3 panelists on how to raise the bar on green design and decarbonization. And because they're going to do a group presentation, not one after another, which is actually kind of a nice metaphor for what it takes to solve the problems we're talking about, I'm going to just introduce them in alphabetical order, and then I'm going to turn the screen over to them. And after they present, I'll come back and we'll have a conversation and some questions and answers, and we'll take some of your questions from the audience. So again, in alphabetical order, we have Marshall Andrews first. Marshall is a project manager at DPR, where he spends his time building trust, inspiring teamwork, and creating strong team identity on DPR's projects. Marshall was particularly instrumental in DPR's construction of its own mass timber office in Sacramento, California, which we're going to hear about tonight, and working with the city and various permitting agencies to figure out how to get this done and how to update building codes to allow for mass timber construction. Second is Ryan Poole. Ryan leads the sustainability group for DPR Construction. And when he was a student at Clemson University, he actually pushed his own university to help shape a mission for a greener future as a director of sustainability. After college, Ryan leveraged that experience and his degrees to help shape the industry. He's passionately driven to ensure that DPR is innovating sustainable practices wherever they operate, build, and then eventually help change the world. And finally, we have Stet Sanborn. Stet is an architect and is a principal of mechanical engineering at SmithGroup. And he's very blunt about the challenges we face. He says we're at a critical point in history, facing the impacts of devastating climate change. We have the tools and the skills to reverse these trends and move to a restorative future. Those are Stet's words. Stet was a major part of the design and construction of DPR's mass timber office, along with other highly sustainable office practices in DPR construction. And so this is our team from construction, engineering, architecture. And so I'm happy to turn the program over to the 3 of you, and I will see you on the other side of that.
We are excited to be here today to not only talk about, DPR and SmithGroup's footprint and the way we've worked together, but to really dive deeper into some of the solutions that we found in one of our offices. And so with that, we'll get started. What we're really discussing today is walking the walk. And so DPR has taken an aggressive approach to our own carbon footprint in-house and the way that we build to help show the way. And so really we take that as our in-house responsibility and hope that others do as well. And in doing that, we've created some incredible partnerships and learned a lot of lessons learned along the way. And so we're excited to have the team here today to talk about some of those on a particular project. Again, we've got Stet with us from SmithGroup, Marshall, who's one of our project managers, project executives out west and helped build the Sacramento office, and myself. Some learning objectives that we'll cover today. We'll discover some methodology to identify aging buildings and how they can be reused to achieve LEED and net zero energy. And so that's really looking deeply into the existing building stock that we have and how we can apply adaptive reuse design measures to continue to grow in low embodied carbon solutions in the buildings that already exist and make those more and more efficient for the current grid system. We're going to challenge the mindset of how traditional organizations think about health in the workplace and where they're missing the real opportunity to improve on life cycle costs. And then lastly, we're going to discuss some of the hurdles that we've experienced in pursuing net zero energy and adaptive reuse, and then collectively brainstorm on proven strategies to overcome those hurdles. So first, I'm going to set pace with talking about some of our net zero energy offices that we have across our portfolio. We started all the way back in 2010 before there were zero energy certifications with our office in in San Diego. It opened back in 2010. From there, we created Phoenix, which was the largest certified building of its kind. We then went to San Francisco, which was a dense urban area. Then to DC, which was a different atmosphere of its own, all the way down to Texas, where there was really a big focus on health and wellness. And then what we're really going to dive into today, which is our most recent one in Sacramento, which not only focused on operational carbon and health and wellness for the occupants, but also focused on the utilization of low embodied carbon solutions within an adaptive reuse space. One of the biggest things that I want to point out here, and the reason we have Stet's beautiful face on some of these buildings, is the importance of collaboration. You know, Susan mentioned it early on, and I would say that Marshall and Stet, through our experiences, would advocate strongly that early collaboration between all of the partners that are involved in a project is the key solution to being able to drive a truly high-performing building. We must have proper time to plan it right. And you got to have all the people at the table when you start planning. So hopefully today we can illustrate that through these projects that we've done for ourselves and many others for clients, the proven methodology for us has been to collaborate as early as possible, to avoid schedule conflicts, to make sure we're within budget, and most importantly, to make sure we're achieving our clients' goals for a more sustainable future. Some of the specific strategies that we took, you know, it's important to mention that each one of our offices is in a different climate zone where we focused on zero energy. And that was so we could particularly focus on different features within each one of those. So here, this just highlights 4 of those and some of the different strategies and some of the similar strategies that we were able to take dependent on the specific climate zone, situation of the office space, and things like that. And so really excited, I think, for Marshall and Stet to get a little bit deeper into some of the strategies we took specifically on the new Sacramento office. A little bit about the path to net zero energy and our DPR recipe. We've created a really awesome high-level graphic that just showcases what we believe is, you know, a minimal features to put in when you're trying to create a zero energy space. You'll see common things like rooftop photovoltaics, and then you might see some more unique solutions like solar tubes or a vampire shutoff switch, which kills all of your non-immediate power for the night. Operable windows, building performance monitoring, and then also our very prized big ass fans, which are high volume, low speed fan systems that keep air circulating through our space for wellness and for energy reduction. And so we're excited, you know, to continue to talk about how we've utilized some of these strategies in specific locations. I'm going to kick it over to Marshall and Stet to start us off with what the owner's project requirements are.
This project was unique for us. Normally we're given a set of owner's project requirements, but for this one, we are our own owner. And so we did take a moment to stop and think about what are we doing first, and let's go ahead and still continue those best practices that we have for other clients and projects and do that for our own. This set that we see here is specific for the Sacramento office. However, each of these high-performing buildings, we put together specific owner project requirements for each of those offices. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes different locations have different goals. And you can also see some of the partners that helped us along the way. But to really highlight would boil down to 4 things that we wanted to achieve with this project to truly make it world-class and special. Is number 1, take care of people in place, something that is great for the environment, but also great for the occupant. We'll get into those strategies. A lot of times they do overlap, but sometimes they are also just opposed to each other, and there's some trade-offs to make both of those happen. We wanted it to be a transformative workplace, something that would stand the test of time. So ideas that we looked at were not necessarily comfortable for day 1 when we moved in, but that we can grow into in 5, 10, 15 plus years. We wanted to do it in a fiscally responsible manner. That way we can show our clients this is how you do it for business cases that work in your own portfolio. And along with that, we wanted to pursue solutions that were both innovative yet simple. You know, we are builders. We probably could make things overly complex and custom, but again, it wouldn't be replicable for others to hopefully be inspired. So we wanted to take things that were off the shelf, but put them together in a unique and innovative manner.
I think what I would add is, and this is sort of going back to Ryan's earlier point about using their own buildings as living laboratories. One of the key things that I think is most exciting about working with DPR as both the builder and the client is that they're always looking to one up the last office, how to make this next one, you know, even lower energy use, more sustainable, smaller footprint. And that sort of makes us as architects and as engineers work that much harder for each project to figure out how low can you go and how can you do it still within that framework. But each project builds on the previous. And there's a lot of lessons learned that we can learn from those previous projects, especially as we sort of march towards you know, reducing carbon to sort of the extreme.
Yeah, great points, guys. I mean, you know, it's one thing we really want to do our living labs to help showcase the way for affordable, high performance buildings. But I go back to the first point, Marshall, which is probably our most important, which is we want to take care of our people, the most important asset within our spaces. And it has been transformative for us to find out how much people really love going into these unique spaces and occupying them. So understanding the total carbon footprint. So what we're going to start off with here is really going through some of the awesome commitments that have been made across our industry, and that's across the whole AEC industry. The construction group finally made its way in there. So the one I'm going to kick off talking about is the contractor's commitment through Building Green. This was just released last year. We've got, you know, I think upwards of about 12 contractors across the country signed on, and many more, DPR being one of them. Super excited about that. And you can see we go through some really incredible categories around carbon reduction, job site wellness for those that are working on the job, waste management, water management, and the type of material selection. And this is really be put well in line with some of the other commitments that I'm going to let Stet go into.
Yeah, so one of the, I'd say, most exciting parts about working with a really collaborative team is when you all have a common foundation that you're jumping from. And so just like DPR has made commitments with Building Green on a decarbonization framework, SmithGroup has also sort of joined as many avenues as we can to both be advocates as well as challenge ourselves to do better. So the biggest one is joining the AIA's 2030 commitment. So driving towards a date of 2030 for all of our projects to be designed to be net zero energy, which is an incredible challenge for a firm of our size and the amount of work that we do, but one that we take extremely seriously. And then we've also joined Carbon Leadership Forum, which is out of the University of Washington. And it's a great organization that is also driving not just operational carbon, but really diving deeply into embodied carbon. And we're going to talk all about embodied carbon today and operational carbon and dive into that. But they're a really great organization if you want to learn more and also learn how to be a better advocate within your community. The two latest commitments that we've made sort of show our strength as an integrated AE firm, so architecture and engineering. Because it's not just the architects that spin carbon, if you will. It's also on the technology that we choose to use and how we choose to build. So SmithGroup has joined the MEP 2040 commitment, and this is really focused on the embodied carbon of all the engineered systems inside the building. So my heat pumps and ductwork and pipes and pumps and all the fun stuff that I love to do, we've committed to driving towards reducing the embodied carbon down to 0 by 2040 for those components, on top of driving our operations to net zero energy by 2030. In addition, our structural engineering partners within our firm are helping us change the way that we actually hold buildings up and keep them from falling down, and challenging the materials that we use. And if you think about each of these pieces, each one touches on a different component of architecture. But when we look at them collectively, we can actually have a really tremendous impact on reducing the carbon footprint of our buildings, and challenging the way that we build. And I think to Ryan's point earlier, it's not just about the carbon, it's also about the experience. And so part of what we're going to talk about today when we talk about DPR's Sacramento office is how those things all overlap with each other and actually help reinforce a more, I'd say, holistic message.
Yeah, instead, let's recap that common theme there, right? We're going to be talking about through all these commitments in our offices as well, embodied carbon, operational carbon, and wellness for the occupants. And there's such a big synergy there, right? That sometimes is overlooked in how we end up creating a healthier environment for both people and the planet, because they're one and the same.
Yeah. So first off, I'm going to just jump in a little bit and sort of show you where we are in that 2030 AIA commitment. So as I mentioned, we're trying to march towards all of our new construction by 2030 being carbon neutral. And that's whether on-site PV or on-site renewable energy or offsets. But we're actually really close to 2030. When I look at the calendar, I get a little nervous. It's 8 years away, a little bit less, that we need to be carbon neutral. And that's really to avoid completely catastrophic climate change. We're already seeing the impacts of choices that we've made in the distant past. And we actually should be going faster than this. But today, if I were to meet the 2030 challenge, I'm really trying to target like an 85% towards carbon neutral for all construction today. And so we're marching towards that. The DPR Sacramento office is actually a case study in how to go faster and do better. Like how can we go above and beyond the 2030 target today in a reasonable cost in the time frame with today's technology? And it's possible. And so today's message is also both sort of energizing, like you can do it, but also like, yeah, you can do it. It's not that hard. So we should be doing it. Like everybody should be doing it. So it's a little bit of carrot and larger carrot. So one of the really interesting things as we start to design net zero energy buildings, and this is from an operational carbon standpoint, we talk a lot about putting solar panels on buildings or putting them near wind farms, a lot of renewable energy to offset our use. One of the things that we haven't talked about until recently, and probably the last 5 to 8 years in a really robust way, is that if the operational side goes to zero, what happens where's the rest of the carbon coming from? And a good chunk of that is on day one of the building. It's not over the 30-year lifespan or the 50-year lifespan. It's on the day that you build the building. There's a tremendous amount of energy that goes into procuring materials, putting assemblies together, building a building, and getting it ready for the day when occupants move in. That carbon is spent, and it's spent right at the beginning. And then we have the operational carbon that's happening after that. Well, if we knock out the operational carbon with solar panels and we get to net zero energy, the focus really has to be on what do we do on that first chunk of carbon from building the building. And if you think about the time importance or the time value of carbon, we're fighting climate change today. And so rather than just focusing on carbon that could be emitted in 30 years because of how you operate the building, we want to put way more attention on that carbon that's happening today, that's happening now with all the construction. And so as you think about your building, what materials you use, that day one carbon, the embodied carbon that it takes just to make it is really, really important. And it becomes more important as we target net zero energy buildings, because that's really the only carbon piece left in the pie.
Yeah, and worth mentioning, Stet, that one of the biggest sponsors of the National Building Museum, C40, has taken a pretty big leap from a municipality perspective to try to drive not only low embodied carbon material solutions, but the actual tools and equipment that we use on the job site to build it. So trying to drive, the actual operations of building towards zero carbon as well.
And a nice takeaway from this graph here too, that you can see in typical building construction, the structure itself takes up almost about half of that carbon footprint. So if you want to spend your time wisely on where do I focus my efforts, just going after the structure alone is going to have your biggest impact with minimal effort.
Great point, Marshall. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think if you want to go one step further, and this is really where the Sacramento office for DPR is kind of a shining point, is that we only build so much new construction in the United States. So brand spanking new buildings, clear site, that's a very small fraction of the overall building stock that's already out there. And so if you think about that embodied carbon or how much carbon it takes to build a building, we have billions of square feet of buildings where that carbon, that embodied carbon, has already been released. It's already in the atmosphere. We're already dealing with the consequences from it. And so if we want to be really strategic about cutting that embodied carbon, one of the best things that we can do is actually look at existing buildings and make them more efficient. So rather than building, tearing something down, starting from scratch, there's a lot of embodied carbon from that structure that can just sit there. It's fine. It was already expelled. Just let it be. And now let's bring up the rest of the building and improve its efficiency and drive it to net zero energy, or even better, to net positive energy. Actually make it a source for offsetting somebody else's carbon footprint or the original embodied carbon that went into the building in the first place. And so that's really the target of sort of what we're going to be talking about today, is the benefits of that adaptive reuse, and why that is like the holy grail of decarbonization, is taking existing buildings and driving them to net positive energy.
So getting in a little bit deeper into adaptive reuse, fun fact, all of DPR's living labs are adaptive reuse facilities. So some of them have some unique stories behind them as well. Our Phoenix office was an abandoned adult film store in a bad part of town. And so not only is there the embodied carbon aspect of telling these stories and creating a high performing building, but there's also the community uplift piece, revitalization, going into areas where we need some urban recovery.
Great point. So one of the things, for every building, for a designer, for an architect, is trying to root your design in place. What does it mean for that location? And when Ryan showed earlier, so the matrix of all the DPR office projects, and notice that not all the strategies were the same for each building. A lot of that is actually responding to local climate, local conditions, how a building meets the street, how it forms an urban edge. These critical design ideas actually influence the way that we come in with an intervention. And so this particular project is right in the heart of downtown Sacramento, in the Central Valley for California. And there's a number of really unique aspects to that area that kind of can inform how we react to the building. So on the next slide, as we take a look, there's elements of community connection. Sacramento has an extremely rich, close-knit community. And there's a lot of elements from that city that you're going to see sort of weave their way into the design. One of the parts that gets me the most excited as both sort of bioclimatic architect as well as a mechanical engineer is Sacramento's climate, which is extremely unique. It's completely different than where I grew up in sort of the rural Midwest. There's this phenomenon in the Central Valley where they have a really crazy high, what we call diurnal swing, where the daytime temperatures in the summer can be over 100 degrees easily, but at night they often cool down into the low 70s. And so that huge swing from day to night actually affords us a lot of opportunities from a thermal energy storage to actually let our building work in tandem with nature, as opposed to using systems to try to overcome nature. And that's one of the key elements as we're working on these adaptive reuse projects, is trying to work with the local climate. And usually when you work with the climate, your energy use will go down. It's when you try to fight everything that your energy use goes up. So step one in this process is learning where you're at and taking advantage of the phenomenon that are there, whether it's energy, climate, water balance, whatever the element may be. And if you can work with it, chances are your building's going to be more successful, and you're going to have to do less to make it successful. So this is just a quick snapshot looking at the site, and we're going to do a little bit more of this. But something that we start to do on the project is look at, again, opportunities for engagement with the community, as well as start to layer in some of the sustainability strategies that we like to use on our projects. So these could be, starting to look at solar capacity on the site. Do we have enough to get to net positive energy on our footprint? Do we need to expand, possibly cover some portion of the parking area? How do we integrate sustainable landscapes into our sites that, again, are using native species and avoiding excessive water or any irrigation in an ideal world? Trying to maximize community connection through adjacencies around public transit, but also providing parking and shower facilities in site. There's a lot of sustainability programs, whether it's LEED, Well Building Standard, Living Building Challenge, that really emphasize sort of this much broader conversation around sustainability. So it's not just a carbon focus. You can use that analysis as sort of a methodology to further reduce the impact and sort of dig your roots into the local community.
And so when it came to trying to find a site, we also made sure to take a moment to pause and really think about where we wanted to go. We were actually already established in Sacramento for about 17 years, and even looked internally, do we retrofit the office where we are right now, or do we move to somewhere else? And for somewhere else, we were taking a look at these properties and then decided to use a choose by advantage framework to figure out which one was the best fit. And kind of looked internally for what does it really mean to us for either renovating or relocating our office. For your projects, it doesn't have to be the same number of things, and it could be more criteria or less criteria, but this is what fit for us. And so we really wanted to get that cultural fit. We have a lot of culture in our company. We have a lot of employees who are very passionate about it and also very passionate about where they live. And so we want our office to reflect those values and want to consider that when we were looking at the different properties. Same with the Sacramento identity. And then does this building have the opportunity to be inspiring? Does it have the opportunity to be sustainable? And part of those selections are, you're relying on infrastructure. What does the bus system look like? Are we picking something where, you can't even get public transportation? That's going to completely change the sustainable dynamic for the office before you even start design. So looking at these different aspects just in site selection is as important as developing the program that we wanted to do. And so you can kind of see up above, obviously, the existing building, and kind of to Ryan's point of, not only are we making this more sustainable, but also doing a bit of a re-beautification, located on actually very busy streets, well-known streets in Sacramento, but very forgettable type building. Was built in 1940, had some renovations in the early 90s that looked like they're more later 70s. And I'm sure the client loved it, but probably not the greater use for more folks.
The trees even look happier, Marshall, right? Like it's,
yeah, they decided to sprout and grow.
Ryan, if you want to hop back, there's one other thing that I wanted to add, and because it's particular to this project. What you can't see is if we could peel up the street and show all the infrastructure that's in a community that supports a building. So sewer systems, stormwater systems, potable water systems, all that stuff is already there. It's in the street. And one of the things that I think folks often overlook is that when you look at adaptive reuse, and especially in this project, because we're adding density, we're adding new square footage to this building as part of the adaptive reuse, is that we don't have to put in the new infrastructure in that community. Whereas if DPR had chosen to build on a brand new greenfield site just outside of town, a lot of that infrastructure would have to be expanded. And so that's additional embodied carbon that would have gone in to support that new growth in a direction. But when we build on it in the urban core, the majority of that infrastructure is there and we can rely on it. And it keeps that density of use tied to it. And that's That's really important because that infrastructure will have to be repaired at some point. You'll have to maintain it over time. And the more use that we can tie to it, the less you have to maintain and the more you support with each foot that you've already put in there. And so if we had a chance to peel up the street, you'd see a whole lot of investment that the community has made over time that we can still harness. And that's really important about sort of adaptive reuse within the urban center.
Yeah, thanks for pulling that back, Stet. I mean, and not only from the building perspective, right? I mean, we have sustainable aspects from transit because now we have access to public transit that density provides. We now have access to food and other amenities that we wouldn't have, maybe on a further out greenfield site. And so lots of compounding sustainability things that add on to that from going with urban density. Yeah.
Yep. So here you can see the two sort of levels of the project. And level one is sort of additional tenant space for a future tenant. And, dividable, et cetera, supporting additional businesses that could come into the neighborhood. And level two is or sort of the maroon or reddish section on the far right, the entrance up, and the whole second level is DPR's office. And the part that's highlighted in green there on the right-hand side, that's all new. That wasn't there. So that's that added density of coming in with a retrofit, repurposing the whole building, but also adding additional density to it to be able to both meet the program requirements that DPR had for how many staff could be in there, but also gives us a chance to bring new life into the space, create new opportunities for connection with nature, ventilation, and Marshall's going to sort of do a deep dive through some of those strategies that were folded in. But by adding that density, it also opens up from a freedom standpoint to design to pull in a lot of things that actually can benefit the occupants.
Yeah, well said. So now we'll get into some of those specific strategies behind the design, guys, and how we really drove operational zero energy. Marshall.
And so here we have cross section of the building and also on the early design cross sections. We had the path to zero and proven design strategies from other DPR offices that we can kind of use a la carte and then apply to this specific building. One of the challenges with adaptive reuse is that you do have to work within the framework of the existing building. But then those challenges become fun and kind of unique and innovative. And so here you see that we can do some on-site generation through PV up on the roof, but also balance that with the use of skylights and solar tubes to bring that natural light in. Take a look at shading strategies. How much light do we bring in? Where do we want to do some external shading? We get a little bit of energy benefit by not overheating it there, but also an occupant benefit by not producing too much glare while people are trying to work. Also, the existing trees from the site selection that you see here really help with that natural shading when we want it in the summer. And you can see in the winter, the leaves fall off and we get a little extra solar gain from it as well. Some plantable roof space and also some retractable doors to take advantage of some natural ventilation. When we use that natural ventilation, it'll reduce our energy footprint because we won't have to use heating or cooling.
Yeah, and another thing to add here, Marshall, is the natural ventilation that we have in our space has been a huge plus during the pandemic because it's allowed us to have people feel more comfortable about coming in the workspace because we have so much air exchange. So that's another good point outside of the climate issues.
Another cross section, just looking at it through a different way, and you can also see kind of the occupant experience too. On the right-hand side is our main entrance, and with there you can see that we also place a stair right there at the entrance. We actually used the concept for an irresistible stair. We do have an elevator, but the stair, it's beautiful, it's right up front, and just unconsciously helps people get a little bit of extra steps in their day. So it kind of works into that employee wellness with a nice experience and healthy building. And you can see here on the right-hand side, we have that operable wall, but then also paired up with operable windows on the left-hand side, we get that full cross ventilation through the space. With the existing building challenges, the shape particularly of this building, was not great for lighting. So it's very dark to the center just by the footprint alone. And then if you look on the left-hand picture, you can see the size of the windows compared to the right-hand picture. We actually increased the amount of glazing to go almost full height windows on existing building to really help flood that natural light in, and then placed some 2-foot diameter solo tubes where needed to bring light even further in. And here, even before we're building out everything else, you can see a major difference in just how much better it looks by bringing that natural light in. Plus, then it allows the occupants to look outside and really enjoy those trees, enjoy that city of trees, treehouse feel that's unique to Sacramento.
Yeah, Marshall, and the solo tubes are there not only to support lowering our energy use intensity, but also to support health and wellness around circadian rhythm. So making sure that we pay close attention to, natural light that we get in our space and how much synthetic light can over time, compound issues physically.
And this is another perspective with the full build out of the existing building half here. So you can see the conference rooms on the perimeter. We went glazing to the interior as well in the conference room, so that way you get those sight lines all the way through the building and you get that natural light all the way back in. And then on the new construction side here, you can see the operable partition where it really opens up windows beyond there and really helps kind of blend that inside and outside. So brings that outdoors in, that indoors out, all that natural air through for our occupants.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite features, Marshall.
So when I say, it can be a challenge, but it can be fun with an existing building, and you have to kind of deal with the hand that you're dealt. With this building, it had a portion of existing basement that we had to abandon. We had some more parking on top for our program, couldn't meet code for a second stair out of there, so we had to give up about 6,000 square feet of basement that we were originally planning on just filling with rock. Ran some cost studies on how much it would cost to fill with rock, and it was pretty expensive. And bringing in other partners from different areas, one of them said, hey, you could do a thermal labyrinth with this building. And we said, cool, great sounding word, sounds fun. Sorry, no idea what it is. Can you please explain to me what a thermal labyrinth is? He said, yeah, you can take all of your outside building air, which you see in the couple red arrows, bring it in through an intake, and it'll come down into the existing basement. And as it goes through the basement, maybe you throw some more walls in there to slow down that airflow and increase your heat transfer, the labyrinth side of it. It will naturally pre-cool that air before you put it up to your HVAC system. So if it's, say, 105 outside in the summer, which we do get several peak days with it being that hot, we actually predict through some energy modeling that we would be able to precondition that air by 14 degrees Fahrenheit. To actually bring it down into the 90s, which is a huge amount, particularly when we're trying to size HVAC systems. And so not only are we saving the amount of energy and carbon, therefore trying to size systems that way, but even our total HVAC size, we can reduce on day one. So we're spending less by doing this kind of unique and innovative use with this existing building. We also ran it in the reverse. Okay, we can cool it in the summertime, but can we also preheat air in the wintertime? So we took it back to our design team. They ran the energy calcs. They said, yes, actually you can. And it performs pretty comparable to the peak days of summer. Plus you actually have more days in winter where you're trying to change that outside air temperature to a more comfortable temperature inside. So you'll actually get more savings using this basement during the wintertime than you will in summer, which was pretty cool and not something that we originally thought it would do.
Unique for Sacramento, right? So it's a great obstacle. So what we've got here, guys, is just where we're going to have some verification. What we need some, we need to be able to show people what we've done and then verify that through proper measurements. And so here you can see some of our reveal labels for multiple offices. We've got San Francisco, then Phoenix, and then our new Sacramento office. And so it goes through a breakdown of where we are with our energy use intensity. So where we really started with lowering the energy demand of the building, and then where we were able to make up with the remainder of that through on-site production. Using mass timber. Sorry, go ahead, Stet. You got something to add?
No, I was just going to say, and a key element of this project was on top of the energy use, tackling that embodied carbon, and that big the big move on this project was working with the team to actually target the low embodied carbon construction technology, and also I would say selfishly for SmithGroup, and probably a certain extent to DPR, is learning how to do some of this new technology on our own work before we talk to our clients about it. And I think that's one of the reasons that living lab is so important, is so that our clients don't have to take it for the first time, sort of a lesson learned, and we can actually bring a lot more value to the projects.
Yeah, well said, Stet. I mean, we've done numerous mass timber since then, but the lessons learned on this one have made the other ones a bit smoother for sure. That's a great segue. Talking about embodied carbon, looking at our traditional structural steel structural components. Marshall pointed out in that earlier graphic where your structure can really be the biggest embodied carbon impact on a project from a material perspective. And so we're talking about wood, one of the only renewable resource that we have, and it absolutely sequesters carbon throughout its lifetime. And so we're going to talk about how that sequestered carbon gets installed inside the buildings, but want to make sure, even though that it's made a big leap against steel and concrete, recently there have been really great inventions with low embodied carbon concrete solutions as well. And so lots of exciting things, innovative solutions that are coming out to help tackle these issues.
So for the mass timber components, it is new and it is exciting, and particularly when we built it here in Sacramento, it was not in the current code and not part of the current code when we sent out to build it, but a great story. It embodies carbon. It's this new interesting material we see clients want to put on their project. We want to learn how to do it. And we sat down with the city, and the city was actually pretty excited about it too. They wanted to learn how to do it as well. So with some early planning meetings, we told them, hey, here's the building, here's what we want to do, here's the expansion that we want to do, and we're thinking about this mass timber thing. Hey, do you know anything about mass timber? And he said, yeah, we've actually seen it. Okay, great. We have about 6,000 square foot addition that we want to do. It's an existing building, had some structure to allow for future expansion. And they said, yeah, it actually is kind of a perfect test case for us to go through. Low risk as a city to approve. We think it will be a pretty safe bet. And here's how we want you to go through a alternative means request to go ahead and get approved, since it's not codified. So they had us actually break it out into 3 different parts. One to address diaphragm in the structure, one to address seismic and shear in the structure, and then one to address fire rating. This way we can tackle each different part that's outside of code on their own, and we can kind of divide and conquer. And so that's what you're seeing here. We did work with a company called Woodworks that definitely want to give them a shout out. They did an incredible job helping us with other case studies and other approvals that other cities or states have gone through, so that we can show some precedents of that, yes, this is out there and this does work. And we're quite confident it will be part of code, but code follows certain cycles. And so here's some shared knowledge that we can bring to help kind of push the project in your local area.
Great. And just to be cognizant of the time and make sure to go through this section a little quicker, but we did full life cycle carbon assessment calculations for the project, sort of from cradle to grave, or cradle to recycling, or cradle to compost, depending on the flavor that you like for this project, as well as for a lot of our projects. We're doing this more and more and being asked to by clients. But for this particular project, being able to switch from a traditional construction method to this cross-laminated timber or heavy timber, it saved a significant amount of carbon. And so for this particular project, it ended up being the equivalent of 33 cars that we got off the road for an entire year. That's a pretty good chunk of carbon. And obviously has energy benefits, the embodied carbon benefits, but I think something else that's really powerful is that it's gorgeous. Like it's a carbon savings, but it's where you want to go be. And I've been in this building a bunch of times now. I keep advocating to our office, like, can we just move in? like this is where we want to sit when we're working on projects in Sacramento. So just the last couple items. I think one thing that we don't want to gloss over, and it's really important, is also the community engagement aspect. So this project actually had a lot of community partners, both local artists and activists that helped actually plan some of the installations, some of the pieces that went in. And then from a design standpoint, if you go to the next slide, Ryan, even some of the finishes in the space were actually chosen to sort of remind people of those carbon chains of what's happening from the overall design standpoint, impact standpoint. So it's not just surface level, but trying to just keep everyone thinking as you look forward, sort of discover new things in the project the more and longer that you're there.
And so with being a living lab, we do want to keep score. For us, it's not just important to design something to be net zero energy, but we want to follow up and verify that it is net zero energy. And if things start to go awry, we want to set things up of where we can properly investigate. And so I had a very complex energy metering strategy, so that way we can break out what's our heating load versus what's our lighting load and kind of tackle the problems where they are. It is a public dashboard. We have links to it here. Also a whole lot more information on other DPR office projects, and also includes more videos, tours, extended learning to go check out.
Yeah, worth noting, Marshall, that we now have all of our offices on this platform collecting our data, and some of them being significantly more sophisticated, like the Zero Energy office in Sacramento. So lessons learned to date: get uncomfortable, be relentless, and listen to others. I think this is really driving back to getting in that collaborative space together super early and figuring out where your roadblocks are. Stet, some more to add?
I would say, the big challenge is to continue to do better. There's no reason that once you solve a problem, that's the last solution there is. And each one of these projects, and why it's so fun to work with DPR, is each one is getting better. And I think each one has a bigger impact in the community. And so, yeah, keep going.
All due to the amazing partners we have, right, Stet?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Marshall, we'll close it off. Any final comments?
Yeah, with everything is connected, there is a lot of overlap and things that are juxtaposed, and at times it can seem overwhelming to try and put all the different pieces and parts together. But going back to, we have great people, we want to take care of great people, we bring on great partners, they can help out with a lot of that heavy lifting and bring that different viewpoint in, and with everyone kind of putting in their 2 cents, you get something that's really greater than the sum of all the parts and pieces going into it. So it's worth the effort.
Well said. I think the final word here that you see there is resiliency. And it's specifically talking about COVID, but I think we're talking about resiliency to all things, right? Resiliency to climate change, resiliency for wellness, resiliency to create a healthier planet. So with that, Susan, we will turn it back over to you.
Let me get myself, there I am, there's my smiling face. So much to talk about. And I was actually writing more questions and switching them up while you were talking, which is always a challenge. But before we get started, I want to answer a couple things on behalf of the members of our audience who might be non-design professionals. So this is one of my favorite technologies, but not a lot of people know what it is. What the heck is a solar tube, and what does it actually do? It looks like magic in the photographs. I don't know. Marshall, do you want to explain that one?
Yeah, I'll take it. It is a small unitized skylight. So instead of cutting into the roof and building all this structure and framing and make it really or more complex to do, you can kind of buy this skylight that's already together, but then has this tube part that comes down, takes the light from up top, focuses it down, and then redistributes it below. So you can kind of capture the sun in those small areas where you can capture it, and then really spread it through the building in a cost-effective manner and a space-efficient manner. Also great for residential too, for bringing in some small daylight spaces into homes.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And they do act like magic because you're actually bringing actual daylight down a tube, which doesn't sound like you can do that, but it does work. And you mentioned that fan, the big fan in your diagram. And I want to make sure, so people may not know that that's the actual brand name of the fan. It's not just how you described it, right? So it's always gets a laugh when people talk about their big ass fans. So there it was, I said it, they're going to bleep me out. But
Thanks for clarifying, Susan.
It is, because I could imagine perhaps there's people in the audience thinking, I can't believe they said that, you know, and that actually, but that is actually the brand of fan, which I think is hilarious. Continuing on, helping our audience understand a few other things. You talked about a lot of these standards that you used, and I was fascinated to see the structural engineers and the mechanical engineers. They're a little farther out of the 2030 challenge. And I wonder, I don't know which one of you maybe wants to take a few minutes to talk about what the 2030 challenge is. And of course, 2030 is just breathing down our necks right now. So we should all be really nervous. But Stet, do you want to explain a little bit about what that is?
Absolutely. So the 2030 challenge, really got its start from the AIA saying, listen, and Ed Masseria and sort of a whole movement around of getting to carbon neutrality. And it was really focused at the beginning on operational carbon. And it was like, it's an imperative, it's an emergency, we need to act right now. And so all of our attention was on operational carbon. And within the last few years, there's been this added layer on that says, that's great. We need to keep doing that, keep pushing on operational carbon. But at the same time, we need to focus on this embodied carbon. And so these other entities, the Carbon Leadership Forum, as I mentioned, started putting frameworks together to say, yes, let's not forget about operational carbon. Let's still be net zero energy. But let's also start focusing on how we build, what we build with, and the materials. And so I really see them as two complements to each other of the total carbon picture. And the structural engineers, I'd say, are going full on right now. They've taken up the charge. The structural engineers are excited to finally have something that they can be like, yes, we're driving this change, and it's sustainable, and it's so they're actually all in, and it's really exciting to watch. The engineering and the mechanical engineer 2040 challenge is really like the latest to say, you know what, we're electrifying all these buildings, we're doing heat pumps, we're doing all this equipment. What's going on with the refrigerants that we're using? And what do we need to do to actually decarbonize those and go to natural refrigerants and low GWP or global warming potential refrigerants? And so it's this really beautiful thing where everybody is sort of grabbing their piece that they specialize in and saying, what can I do to jump in the fight? So it's not enough to just get to net zero energy or net positive. It's really now we're focused on how are we getting there and making sure that the how is matching that end goal of getting to carbon neutrality.
Yeah, that's great. And one more clarification again for our audience, because there's so much in this presentation. So most people are pretty familiar with LEED, I think. They may not be.
I hope so.
I hope so. I mean, I think the general public, many of our audience members might be just members of the general public who are really interested in this topic, and they might walk by a building and they see that certification. They see that, that sign on a building, LEED Platinum, or they might see that in a real estate ad. And then there's the new one, WELL building. What's different between WELL and LEED?
Yeah, I'll take that one real quick. So they really are meant to work harmoniously together. So there's about a 30% overlap between the two programs. So LEED does have some focus on wellness for occupants, and then WELL does have some focus on energy use intensity and reduction of that. Where WELL really transitions separate is it focuses primarily on the wellness of occupants within the space. So looking at how things affect you from really where we spend 90% of our time. You know, we've had this big focus on the environmental impact, but not what the human impact is from sitting inside a space that wasn't naturally designed for us. And so there is now this more of incorporation of biomimicry and biophilia. How do we actually respond to, you know, synthetic lighting? How do we move throughout a space? Are we too stationary? Or are we getting up and moving enough and creating good activity for physical health? Along with even things like nutrition and, you know, programming around cleaning protocol and the type of products you clean with. So it's really been incredible for us. We now have 5 of our own offices are well certified. One of the most recent being in Nashville was platinum. And it's really, you know, made a huge impact on how people endure the space and enjoy it. And then in turn, how it's impacted their health in the long run. And so that's going back, Susan, to where, you know, we truly believe the most important asset is the people itself.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's fascinating the way you guys described that you're not really asking any clients to do something that you won't do to yourselves, basically. You're going to be your own guinea pigs, the living lab, and really fascinating to see how many different places that you've built in. I'm really intrigued by how competitive they probably are with each other, trying to outdo each other. That sense of walking the talk. And it sort of sets you up for all sorts of really interesting conversations internally. But I think that, I mean, we'll stick with you here, Ryan, basically, and thinking about that as a big culture change, right? As the director of sustainability, you were sort of responsible for getting this big company, top to bottom, to sort of prioritize this. And I think the last thing you said, where this is crucial for basically human development, right? It's for your employees, talent retention, great argument to make about green building and well standards. But I love the part in your bio where I read that you had sort of pushed Clemson, right, your university, to sort of do better. And I'm intrigued whether that experience when you were a student, how that set you up or helped you to sort of do what you did with DPR, or was DPR already primed to change, right? Did you have to do any nudging or pulling? And not to call Clemson out, I'm sure they're doing a great job. Maybe I shouldn't have called them out. But every university, right, is trying to do better. So I'm just curious how that experience affected what you do now.
Yeah, Clemson's doing great, and they definitely afforded me the opportunity to start carving my career path at a super early age. And yeah, I mean, similar to how DPR saw that we had a responsibility to make an impact on the environment. That's how I felt when I was in college. You know, back then there weren't as many people focused on it. You know, and so I saw this incredible opportunity to jump in and help shape something. And I think that transitioned super well to my role now at DPR. And Marshall and Stet will tell you, I mean, we have an infectious culture that we prioritize over most everything else. And so change at DPR in a positive way is honestly fairly easy. But I'll tell you this, Susan, I mean, we're making a small, you know, drop in a big ocean, right? The purpose of what we're doing is not necessarily to, you know, brag about what DPR is doing or you know, make an impact in what our company's doing. It's really to help guide our clients and others in the industry that, you know, we can do this. We can do it at affordable rates. We can do it in schedule. We can still hit your program needs. We just need the time to all sit down and collaborate early together, right? With design partners, contractors, and owner and local municipalities to make sure that we can all gain alignment in the goals that we're creating and how we're going to reach them. And I think that's, you know, synergist no matter what type of organization you are, right? It's looking at your internal culture, setting the right pathway, and taking some responsibility in that, you know, it's not just the company's impact on the environment, but in turn, the impact on the human race.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And so Marshall, I'm going to turn to you for a minute, although of course all of you can jump in. Again, it's sort of fantastic to hear you all talking about the same subject matter from these different perspectives. Love the Sacramento office. I think the comment that it's high performing and it's absolutely stunning is great. And we can get in maybe later into a whole discussion about how we recalibrate what we see as beautiful, right? As we look at a building that's high performing, if it's high performing, it should be beautiful to us. But I was interested in the scorecard you showed for the site selection. And there's a lot of text up on the screen, but I had the benefit of seeing this ahead of time. So I read a lot of that in detail. And this question about cultural fit and connectivity, it sort of points out site selection and basically the sustainability goals aren't just technical or design problems, right? The building and whatever you're doing, whether it's for you, your own company or a client, they have to perform socially and culturally. And so I'm really intrigued with how you incorporated those typically kind of intangible, fuzzy things into your scorecard. And the tougher question, you did show at the very end that you're tracking, right, with a dashboard, you're tracking all your performance, all the metrics on electricity use and, you know, energy intensity. Are you tracking those, right? How do you know if you've hit those social and cultural things? So it's a little bit of a tough question. And I think everyone probably wants to weigh in, but Marshall, I'm gonna ask you to start that one.
Of course. So yeah, how do you define, you know, is the existing building, the structure, the location, a cultural fit? They thankfully, at least defining culture within DPR, I think we do a pretty good job at, and we have a lot of conversations of. And so just having that culture at the forefront really helps that out. But then it makes that decision a whole lot more meaningful and impactful, because if we pick a spot that doesn't actually feel like it fits that culture, we're going to hear about it. People are going to feel personally connected to that decision of where did we move to. And so there is a give and take of, you know, how much do you include everyone and how do you get the ideas from everyone, and then kind of like pick kind of what's the best solution for everyone. So SmithGroup actually did a great job helping us as a like second party, observing how do we work in our existing office, and just being kind of that like informal, all right, this is what we see that you're doing, and this is what we hear that you're doing as a company culture, and we think these are the things that your building wants and needs. And so with our like 4 main criteria, that was actually boiled down from like 19 goals that we wanted to achieve, to then boil it down to 4 criteria that's a little bit more manageable. And so that all kind of baked into the, you know, where is the best cultural fit for the project. And a lot of it with, you know, going to that urban core, we've seen a revitalization in the urban core, and we want to be part of that. But we're a builder in Sacramento. We want to be in the heart of Sacramento. And so just that kind of big picture representation of where our address is, reflecting where we do work, that was a big value to us.
So I'll add to that, Marshall, right? Like it's important to do focus groups and surveying and talking to your people in that local office, right? I think that's how we drove some of the decisions that we make is through making sure that people have a voice in, you know, the design and location and things like that.
Yeah, fascinating. So I just have to dive into mass timber, and I'm going to set up a few questions, and I've got a question from the audience. Because this is one of my favorite topics. Paul Kilmer didn't mention at the start that the Building Museum did an exhibition in 2017 called Timber City. And at the time, which seems so long ago, we were trying to show basically how timber was being used all over the world, but we couldn't keep up, right? By the time the exhibition closed, there were far more projects going on. So it's super exciting. But we were always dealing with a general public who was asking, wow, shouldn't I be hugging trees instead of cutting them down? Like, what about fire? Isn't this like the worst idea ever? And so, I don't know, I think this might be a Marshall question also. The issue about convincing regulatory agencies, particularly in California with wildfires and the seismic issues. Like there's a lot of issues with the connections, not to get too geeky about it, but you showed, you know, that you got your building permit, how you had to break it down. What did it take to be that persuasive to get this building built?
So there's definitely an educational portion of it for kind of what we knew and what we were sold on what wood is, and then what the industry has learned from that backlash and what they're doing now. So the old adage of save the trees, email line, please consider the environment before printing out this email because you're cutting down trees. And then here we're doing a highly sustainable building and let's do it out of a bunch of wood. Didn't seem to align in first reaction. And so I think aside from mass timber, when you're looking at any kind of embodied carbon, is what is the manufacturing process of it and why is this a good or bad idea? When it came down to mass timber, we've learned that a lot of the logging companies, they now log in a much more sustainable fashion. And there's also obviously certifications for third party like FSC or even STI to go ahead and ensure that those processes are in there. And so just where the source material is can be done in a sustainable fashion. Now, you think cut down tree, think big tree. What they use for mass timber is not those big trees, but actually small growth wood. And so they harvest young trees and they harvest it from sites that are made to kind of rapidly regrow. And then the whole embodied carbon, as it grows, it brings carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and embodies it into that wood structure, cut it down, manufacture it, regrows, rinse and repeat. On the fire side, interestingly enough, wood is actually pretty self-sustaining when fully engulfed on fire. When you have a steel structure in high heat elements, it tends to bend and then collapses. When you have a large piece of wood fully engulfed, it maintains its structural value. And the best way to think of it is that if the building was to catch fire, it's not like it's a lot of pine needles and small tinder, it's these big logs. And so, if you go camping and you're trying to start a fire, you can like take your match and big piece of log, it's not gonna light. And the buildings have a very similar rate to it. Now they will char and they will burn, but there are calculations for how fast that goes, and which is actually a surprisingly slow process. And so the engineering, you can still do it safely.
Yeah, I think
It's a
that's
great
great.
analogy.
Go ahead, Ryan. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think just in the sense of using mass timber, right? So you mentioned forest fires. One of the sustainable practices that are used in forestry management is getting ahead of those locations, right? Where we have constant forest fires. Like Marshall said, we use new growth. When you have forest fires that hit old growth, you're losing all of the carbon that those trees have stored over their lifetime. So if we do proper management and we can get ahead of that, A, it slows down forest fires because there's a lot less growth available for them to burn. B, we also keep from losing the significant amount of sequestered carbon that we already have through those. So it's really working with climate change and some of the natural disasters we have to have proper management and using one of the only resources we have that's renewable as well.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get to the final three questions in a minute. I could just ask you guys questions about this all night long, but I do have, we did get a question from the audience, and it has to do with mass timber. And this is another of those things that comes up is, was it, and I'll just read it, did the project take a financial hit because it was a small scale use of mass timber? A lot of times the rhetoric is it's not really cost effective unless you're doing really big mass timber projects to take advantage of the scale. I know this is for your own, but did you learn that it can be done at small scale? And did you guys kind of bite the proverbial, I don't know, charred wood and just go ahead and do it because it was worth doing? And then we'll go on to the three questions. So I don't know.
Yeah, there was a financial premium to do mass timber on this project. It's a mass timber addition to an existing building, so there's challenges there. And then as you point out, it's also a small scale. But we do learn how to do it. We do push the city building code. If we were to propose a 20-story mass timber project, the building code approval would be a much different process or not approved. And so while, yeah, there are trade-offs of that financially, it was a little more, there are other benefits. And when we went into it, we thought it was a little bit more on the cutting edge. We learned that it was more on the bleeding edge. but we were able to share those lessons learned with other projects and also learn about the industry as a whole that has rapid growth and expansion to where I'm sure in the near future that this conversation where we keep going into, is it a cost premium? We talk less and less about it. Of that, more we talk about, oh, you're getting all these carbon savings and you're also building it a whole lot faster. And it's also a whole lot more quiet for the community in which you're building.
And
Well-
demand should make it more affordable over time too, right, Marshall, as we see with other, sustainable building materials.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's very encouraging. That's exactly what we would want to have happen. So we're in the sort of final minutes of the program. And those of you who have been in our audience before, we ask the same 3 questions of all of our panelists as we try to sort of put together as kind of a mosaic of different perspectives on this. And so I've got these a little bit rehearsed. And I'm going to toss them to each one of you in turn. Ryan, you're going to get the first one, but each of you should feel free if you want to add to it. And this one really has to do with communication, because you were talking about storytelling and sort of getting the point across. And from your perspective in the construction industry, do we need to change? And if we do, what do we need to change in how we communicate to our communities? And on the flip side, are we listening to everyone that we need to listen to get where we want to get? Ryan, you want to start that one?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure the others will want to weigh in. We have a lot to change. There's always room for improvement. I don't think we've even begun to really have the right connection as a community. And I want to point it back to, honestly, the educational piece. Really helping people understand why we build certain ways we do, what behavioral decisions that we make and how they impact, the overall production and energy use or water use in a space. And so that key connection of collaboration and education on the front end, I think, is vital. And we've still got lots of opportunities to continue to expand that. I think too that I'll just continue to point back to the fact that early collaboration with everyone at the table as early as possible is really what's going to be the most beneficial. And that goes hand in hand, not just with the AEC partners that are developing, but most importantly with the community as well. When you don't have upfront proper communication with a community, when you're coming in to build a new facility, it can have detrimental impact, right, to how the community perceives that. And so it's not just looking at how that building impacts it, but who are the people that were using to build it? Are they local community members? Are we uplifting the community in that way? Are we incorporating community throughout the design so that, the community enjoys the space, appreciates it, and wants to utilize it? One of the things that we would be the worst is if we created a space and nobody enjoyed it and nobody wanted to use it, and then adaptive reuse tossed aside, right? Because it just becomes inevitably a high intense carbon usage for not a good output. And so continue to point back to, we have lots of opportunity to continue with communication. I think it's probably most around awareness and education and getting the public's opinion and input as we work through design that's most conducive on the sustainability front, but also from a community involvement front.
Well, that does sort of anticipate actually the next question, which is for Marshall, because it looked like Marshall had something to weigh in on this, which has to do with how we as designers, architects, builders, urbanists, how we need to change in our own industry. But it gets to this question of education and empowering. And again, I want to go back to your discussion, Marshall, about thinking about the user, thinking about connectivity, thinking about the cultural issues. And so how should we try to educate and empower our communities to join this effort? That is, do they know what to ask for? How do we educate and empower our clients and communities so that they know what to ask for?
Yeah, and a lot of times when we do building tours and take people through here, there's not a lot of questions because it's a lot to take in and they don't know what to ask for. And so I say, here's some common things that people have asked me and you can take a look and see. But I think that the key portion is that, before the project is started, take a look internally. What is it that we want to do? And if you identify those before you get through all the minutia, you have this nice guiding light to try and actually push that envelope. And then as you're actually going through it, to be very mindful on documenting it and writing these down and then representing them in a way of where others can then learn from it. You know, at the Sacramento office, we take a look at all of the new things that we're doing here, but we're standing on the shoulders of all of our other projects that also have an equally long list of new things that they did. And we wouldn't have been able to achieve it, A, unless they did it, but B, unless if they actually wrote it down and documented what worked, what didn't, and how can others do it. And so now with all of us kind of putting our 2 cents into this greater document, you know, we have this great collection and a la carte menu of things that people can look at and just grab. And so sometimes things that work in Sacramento also work in Washington, DC. Sometimes they don't, and you'll borrow things that work in Austin that also work in Washington, DC. And so we can kind of build up this collective knowledge. And then we can get it out there by doing these presentations. We actually found by applying for awards, we would actually get a lot of the knowledge out there. And then we would find that there's different communities to apply for awards as well. And so like even our artist connection, because Midtown Sacramento has a lot of art into it. Now we have this artist community that's kind of learning about sustainable building, and we're learning about art and culture and form and things that contractors don't normally look at. And so just kind of bringing in all of these different collaborators and bringing them early, you start spreading the knowledge across all of them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it, in some ways, the presentation itself answers the last question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. First, I have to mention Sacramento, Washington, D.C. When it's in the high 90s here in Washington, it'll cool off at night to like the low 90s. So it's, and we just love that. But I think the last of my questions is one of the objectives of this conversation is to demonstrate that innovative solutions are replicable, right? And that we can transfer things from one solution to another. That's why your set of your own offices, which is kind of like a scientific experiment, right? It's the same culture, the same company, different locations. And I love your description of the a la carte menu. You had mentioned a recipe before, a la carte menu where you can select. And so Stet, I'm going to sort of offer you the chance to talk about replicability and transferability as you with SmithGroup move on taking this experience to different projects. How important is that, and how is that working?
Yeah, I think it's actually probably one of the most important parts. And I'd say the piece that's the most replicable is actually a process. It's really a process of asking questions. The answer sometimes is different in each climate zone. The response might be a little bit different based on the community that you're in. But I think asking those questions about what are my co-benefits of these strategies? What's the most climate smart approach to on-site energy generation? We actually took the very similar process at each site, and as you march around, but the answers are always different. And I think that actually also reinforces the connection to community. When the solutions are very place-based, they're very, you look at that building and you say, this is Sacramento, the city of trees, windows open, night purge, all these strategies. The same is true at the Phoenix office. The outdoor seating at the Phoenix office has evaporative coolers and fans, so you can enjoy, these extremely dry, hot, summer days. So I think it's a process that's most replicable. And then you will, over time, you pick up like, okay, well, the CLT construction work here. No, it's not a good fit. But you know what else is this other pre-manufactured, technology, or maybe full modular prefab. And so I'd say the biggest thing that's replicable is asking the questions and making sure that you're diligent about not stopping at the first answer and sort of digging just a little bit deeper. And that could be true for energy systems, for HVAC systems, as well as community connection, transit, all those elements. I would say it's more of the process that is actually can apply to any project, whether it's a high rise or a retrofit of a small urban core building.
Great. So before I turn it back over to Paul Kilmer, anything one of you wants to, any last words? Did we forget anything? If not, I'm going to thank you all three for this. It was fantastic. Again, really wonderful in-depth look at a full spectrum of what it means to actually decarbonize and also make things performing and beautiful, which is great. So
Thanks,
thank you
Susan.
all. Paul Kilmer, it's your turn.
Thank you, Marshall, Ryan, Stet, and Susan, for this thoughtful and important program. I've learned so much. I also want to thank the audience and emphasize that you are the C in community in this ABC series. And we we need your feedback. Did you learn something new? Do you feel more comfortable, empowered to act? You'll receive a survey where you can share your valuable thoughts on this program. And I truly hope that you'll take just a few minutes to complete it. Please note that this discussion was recorded and an edited version will be available and free to view on our website within 10 business days. Please don't hesitate to spread the word by sharing that link with your friends. And if you were unable to attend previous programs in this series, please view them on our website at nbm.org. Thank you again for joining us tonight.